Mike Hagan. Welcome back to Real Insight. And you're the first person that I get to say welcome back to Real Insight to, because I've never had a guest come back. So welcome back.
Thank you very much.
We're going to cover some stuff today. For those that haven't seen series 1 of Real Insight, Mike Hagan was episode 2, I think, of season 1.
Yeah.
I don't know what episode this is yet, but that doesn't matter. But we'll extend on some of the stuff that we spoke about in the first season. For those that missed it, I'm going to pass to you. Give us the rundown of who you are, what you do, and why you're here today.
Right. Who I am, Mike Hagan. Not a fern tree called accent, so you might have to do your subtitles trick again, Mike. Look, I've took to describing myself as a failed electrician, really. That's how I want to be seen. Why I say that is I actually began my career quite a few years ago as an apprentice electrician in the nuclear industry in the UK. And I lasted about a week. And then they realised I was actually colourblind. And apparently a colourblind electrician on a nuclear plant's not a great thing. You've seen The Simpsons?
Yeah.
So I ended up as a fitter and turner. I became a fitter and turner. And I was actually 25 years in the nuclear industry. Done many interesting things, really fascinating industry. And became a health and safety rep and a shop steward, a union rep. And I always say that's where I really went back into education at that point. Evidently far too good at that role because they made me a manager. And I went back and trained in my late 20s around a whole bunch of things. And I ended up as what was termed, a very archaic term in the UK, a duly authorised person, which comes from the Radiation Protection Act. And it means you're allowed to switch on and switch off the safety functions on a nuclear plant. And that's where I first experienced the things that we often talk about around poor mental health in the workplace. Mm-hmm. And I guess that's where I developed a passion around workplaces and ensuring that people are their best selves in workplaces. And then I went to a wedding in Byron Bay. And I thought, this is actually a lot nicer than the part of north of England that I came from. So some 18 years ago, we came out and emigrated to Australia. I share with people my lived experience around mental health because while it was 25 years ago, I used to tell people that it was social anxiety and generalized anxiety disorder that I was diagnosed with after some 5 years of not speaking to a soul about it, including my partner, who thankfully at the time stuck around, has been my wife for 30 years now. And I share that story with people because I think it's one of those things, especially men, we're just not good at talking about those things. And I've done pretty well since. So people often tell me about, we were looking to hire because, they had a history of mental health. Well, I've kind of done okay since. So, the career trajectory from there was the plant where I did experience some mental health conditions, CAM being what it is. When I went back into education and got into OHS and became, I think it was a safety officer was the first title, I ended up as a safety manager for the same plant. And when I came to Australia, I was a consultant for a little while around small to medium businesses, which was a great opportunity to see the broad landscape that is Australian workplaces. Then I got into a multinational where I looked after health and safety for the Oceania region for a while, Bosch, the German organisation. And 14 years ago, I often joke with people that I crossed over to the dark side. And I got an opportunity to manage human resources at a general manager level. And it was only really when I understood human resources as well as OHS that I started to make a difference. So I spent 25 years trying to make workplaces that were more conducive to positive mental health. And I realised then that OHS are really good at doing risk assessments and really good at identifying what the problems are, but they simply don't have, the truth is they don't have the gravitas or the influence or the broader understanding of how an organisation's capacity and workflows actually are put together. That lives in human resources domain. So I always say to people, it reminds me of the fantastic quote from, it gets attributed to Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and it was that his quote was, "There comes a time when we need to stop pulling people out of the river, and we need to go upstream and see why people are falling in."
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I got into HR, I got to see upstream, went, that's why we do things that way. It eventuates in this, but now I understand why we do it that way. Let's talk about that. So what I do now, I'm a workplace consultant who kind of sits in that gap that sits between human resources and health and safety. And I've been the executive. I've been the person with the commercial responsibilities as well. I've been the shop steward, and I've been the person with lived experience. So I like to think I've got a fairly comprehensive view of people problems, or people challenges when they do arise in a workplace. And I've spent the last 18 months, almost 2 years, helping organisations with a real mixed bag of issues that ultimately are focused around creating better workplaces.
So I think it's been 18 months since we spoke. It would have been probably July or August last year. What are you seeing, particularly with the work that you do? But I think as the mental health message becomes more and more prevalent in the workforce, have you seen anything in the last 18 months that is, I don't want to say, that's reinforcing the fact that we're doing the right thing, but what shifts do you see in businesses starting to understand the importance of the mental health of the people that work for them?
That's a broad horizon. So I've seen a lot of changes, and it's a rapidly changing landscape. And one of the drivers, I'll talk a little bit about legislation, which does change the way companies act, the way companies think. But one of the main changes is people's perceptions. People are coming out of schools and universities into the workplace with an expectation that, in the same way would stop somebody falling from a height, we'll put some rigor around stopping them being burnt out. And I remember, it's maybe 6 or 7 years ago now, interviewing a young lady for a student engineering role, really, really smart candidate. And, at the end of the interview, when we'll ask, is there any questions you want to ask us? And they'll ask about the bus routes, or they'll ask about the canteen.
Yeah.
This young lady said, should I be successful in applying for this role and come to work here, what will you do to look after my mental health and well-being in the workplace? Well, I was in this space, I was around there, but I'd never been asked that question in an interview before. I've had it 2 dozen times.
Well, I get it as well. It's very common because now, and I think you nailed it when you speak about the youth. It's the fact that you and I come from a generation where mental health was never a thing, not to be spoken about, particularly amongst men.
Yeah.
But now the next generation of kids, it's part of their like daily health check. Am I mentally healthy as well? So businesses have almost got no choice, because if you don't embrace that way of thinking, you're just not going to get the employees anymore.
Well, you talk about the changes. And when I speak to organisations, my entry point is generally, can you come and speak to our executive and talk about the due diligence around the new psychosocial health regulations if you're outside Victoria, and the OHS Act if you're within Victoria? And I'll say, yeah, I'll talk to that, but I want to talk about some other things as well. And I'll talk about the real impact of your organisation, because people will get hung up around things like work cover claims and the downstream topics that we talk about. And the real impact to organisations, it's 2 things. It's loss of talent, because people will not stay in an organisation that they think doesn't have their best interests at heart from a wellbeing point of view, health and wellbeing point of view. And it's the associated costs. So to give you a real-time example, there's some great work done by, I think it was Elmore and the Human Resources Directors Forum. And it said pre-2021, the average cost, and let me pull the figures to the front of my mind, the average cost for a hire in Australia was about 10.5 grand. Post-2021, we had the back end of the COVID, we had the Great Resignation, etc. Those costs went to about 23,000. So, then Harvard done a report that talked about between $5,000 and $15,000 in terms of costs just for bringing somebody on board, my time, your time, the inductions, etc. So let's not quibble. Let's call it 30,000 for a hire. For a business to actually compensate for that person leaving the organisation, if they're on a 10% EBIT, 10% profit margin, they've got to create $300,000 worth of revenue for that person that left. So my opening question to any organisation, twofold. Can you tell me what your attrition rates are? What are your turnover rates? Okay. Now can you tell me your turnover rates for your talent pool? The people that you've got identified for leadership in the next 8 years. And they'll often go into a huddle there because we don't like sharing that information. And I spoke to a chap maybe 6 months ago, and he called me back, and their attrition rates were running, I think it was about 17%, which their market sector was running about 14 at the time, so a little bit high, not too high, until they'd done the review of the talent pool and the leadership group, and it went to 43%. Now, in fairness to that organisation, they asked me to come in because they knew that they had some cultural challenges. And why I share that anecdote is, the big four consultancies will talk about 11.5 billion to the economy. That means nothing to a small to medium business.
Correct.
But if you can actually say, look, what's your EBIT, what's your attrition rate, what's your typical cost to hire, that's what it's really costing you at the moment. So I'm seeing, in answer to your question, I'm seeing a change in the level of literacy and understanding around the topic that you can bring to the conversations. And then there's a point that people always lead off on, which is legislation. And the legislation since 2017 in Australia, it's always in a parallel track. There's always what Victoria does because, as you know, Mike, we like to be different in Victoria.
Definitely.
And then there's the rest of Australia. And no matter which state or territory you're in, the expectation around managing, so they talk about psychosocial health in the workplace. Let's debunk psychosocial. So psychosocial, two words welded together. There's a psychology of how we think, how we feel, how we react. And the social environment, in this case, is the workplace. So when you hear the cool kids talking about psychosocial, we're talking about mental health and well-being in a workplace. And the narrative has changed considerably around there and will change more in the next 12 months because the legislation in the other states and territories, I'm delineating here, but I'll bring it back together again. As soon as you put legislation in, it has to be followed with regulation. And the regulation needs competency and capability. And that's been built over the last 18 months. And there are now cases pending where organisations will be held accountable, where they haven't actually done the things that they need to do to look after the mental health and well-being of people, and it's led to a detrimental outcome. When those court cases come through, the appetite to actually do things proactively will increase. And that's not just a mental health topic. I'm sure when asbestos was introduced, there was a similar lag.
Yeah.
So lots of changes from a legislative point of view, from a social expectations point of view, and an economic awareness that this thing actually does, have a detrimental effect to businesses of all sizes and all shapes.
I want to ask a question that it might put you in a predicament. So if you can't answer it honestly, that's fine. When you deal with organizations, can you sense the difference between the organizations that are doing it to adhere to the legislation and keep the boxes ticked versus the organizations that genuinely care about the people and are building a safe and productive place for people that may be mentally challenged or have mental conditions that don't allow them to get on with life like normal people? Can you see when a business is doing it to tick the boxes versus, no, these guys are doing it because they want to build an amazing culture, an amazing workplace?
Generally, it takes me at least 4 minutes to work it out, Mike.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, look, from a heartbeat to 4 minutes. And let me choose my anecdotes carefully. I've appreciated some organisations that have brought me in and said, look, can you tell us what is the minimum thing that we need to do to meet legislative requirements? On the 2 or 3 occasions where that's been put to me, I've said, yeah, I can do that. But can I just give you a bit of a bigger picture? I'll talk to them about the retention issues. I'll talk to them about loss of talent. I'll talk to them about the other things. And usually by the end of that 45 minutes, they're saying, right, can we do some of that as well? So I understand, especially today with the commercial drivers, why people would have that as an entry point, because they'll have, shareholders that'll be asking them difficult questions. And I normally begin speaking to a head of HR or a head of safety, but the needle moves when you can put me in front of a CFO.
Yeah.
Not the CEO, the CFO, because the CFO will understand, the things that we're talking about that are hitting the P&L that aren't on the P&L. The other thing that I often ask organisations is, it's an age-old consultant question. I've been here for 2 years. I've done a great job. You're delighted with the way things are now. What's changed? What does it look like? And what I'm asking them to articulate is, what is it you really want? In the words of those prophets, the Spice Girls, what is it you want? What do you really, really want?
Yeah.
And I get a whole wide range of answers, and there's often a pause before the answer. And I'll share with you one answer that I had not too long ago. Somebody said, well, they want me to go and do some training. We just want people to be more resilient to the stuff that happens around here. I said, right. Like parrots in coal mines, budgies, canaries in coal mines.
Canaries in coal mines, yeah.
And that
what we don't want to do is change the way that we do things that might be affecting people. We just want the people to be more resilient. That's great.
So I clearly rolled out the Desmond Tutu quote. Yeah. And those guys, again, I've got a very good strike record of speaking to organisations and explaining it in a way that they go, right, so if we do that, we might never need to worry about this, or only seldom worry about this. And then you start talking about the strategic approach, looking at the work, and how do you find out what stresses people? An authentic conversation. You ask with curiosity. You don't ask with a mind to reinforce the thing that you think you already know. And so when I go into a conversation with an organisation, it becomes apparent very, very quickly their level of literacy. And I don't meet, good employees and bad employees. All employees, to my mind, generally want to do the right thing. They're just not sure what the right thing is. And I think sometimes with the terminology we use around mental health and mental health in the workplace, I don't think we make it easy for them, Mike.
Oh, 100% we don't. And I could even talk to that in the sense of, coming to the point of my diagnosis. I'm one of those guys that always, probably as a youngster, my stepfather was the main male role model in my life, and he was a pattern maker. Left school in year 10, got a trade, and then was a builder. And so he was one of those guys that he was either chronically depressed or he was also neurodiverse and never diagnosed. And it's very obvious to me now. But he's one of those guys that was from a world where just get on with it. Like you have to get it done. And so I went into the workforce with that mentality. And I probably had that mentality in the workforce for the whole time that I was there up until like last year, the start of last year when I started this journey. Just thinking that that's what happened. That's work. So when you go to work, you have to shut up and get it done or they'll sack you. Like that's the equation that used to be in my mind. And I talk to people when I'm talking about the neurodiverse stuff. It wasn't until I started working here at Insight 2020 that actually changed, because the owners of this business just had a different point of view where if I'm expressing that something's wrong, they're actually opening a space for that where it's like, okay, well, let's talk about that. And do you need some time? And do you need to go and speak to someone? And have you, delved into it a bit more? And I'm still in that mentality of, it's fine. I'm a manager now, so I've just got to do it. I've just got to shut up and get it done. And then I hit a wall. I think it was probably the start of 2021, very hard. And that started sort of the journey into my mental health discovery. But again, I always credit it to the fact that if I wasn't working here and I had another employer that was like the other 5 that I'd had in the lead up, I probably would still be in the just get on with it state. I wouldn't have gone through the discovery and the stuff that I've been able to do thus far. So I'm always one, when I try and ask questions like that, the workplaces that are doing it genuinely will naturally get the results. Yeah. Like you don't even have to, I've got to make sure I tick this box. So what things, Mike, do I need to do to tick this box? If you go full slather on the thing and go, no, I'm going to commit to making sure that this workplace is healthy for my people, all the results just come naturally.
Yeah.
Like you're not pulling anyone to a legislation box tick. You're building an environment that's safe. So yeah, I always like to double down on that, because I think people that invest in building a workplace that can work for people that particularly suffer from mental health challenges, because the thing that I say when I talk about suffering from mental health challenges, it's like never being able to realize the things that your brain is really good at, because the work environment that you're in is forcing you to do the things that the work demands. Where again, here, I've been able to create space for things that I'm not just great at, but actually love doing, and double down on them. And then all of a sudden the work gets easier. The coming to work gets easier. All the things that would normally challenge you become easier because the place is built for people like you.
So let's abandon our storyboard and let's just follow the conversation, Mike, because that's what we do. What you've described there, what you've articulated from a lived experience and a personal point of view, and thanks for sharing that, is one of the big challenges I see in workplaces now. And this is an area, I've got to be honest, I enjoy working in, because it's not a health and safety issue. It's kind of not a human resource issue. It's a person issue that sort of sits across all of that.
Yeah.
And I talk to organizations. When I go in, I talk to them holistically. I don't talk to them about the health and safety aspects. I just talk about the business and then try and help them understand the different pressure points that, are relevant around mental health. And one of them is what you've just described, because I'll ask to see their diversity and inclusion, a typical policy for diversity and inclusion. It's great. You've read one, you've probably read most of them, and it's enlightened. It's got some great things. I'll say, right, fantastic. Can I see your code of conduct? Right, we'll bring that out. And that's always written, in a very different term. And this is
more formal.
Much more formal. Right, can I see your disciplinary procedure? And what I'm looking for to say across all these, there's a humanistic element that says, and while we're doing these things, we'll still consider these things. There's an organisation asked me to do a piece around, and I thought it was a great question, definitely ahead of the curve. They said, Mike, I delivered some mental health first aid training for them, and on the back of that it said, can you talk to us about how we look after people's mental health, where you have to go into performance management? Because, it said that, because somebody has a mental health challenge or a condition, it doesn't mean you're exempt from performance expectations. And I said, yeah, I can do that. Before I do that, can I have a look at your policy that you have in existence today? And can I speak to a few of your key players, of people that have obviously, raised a passion for this topic? And we ended up looking at the things they were doing around general performance management. I said, because if you do that stuff and the leadership stuff well, there kind of isn't that many people drift downstream because of, the impact of that. And I guess the point I'm making is the thing that we've spoke about for many, many years as being just good leadership traits, the ability to listen, the ability to open a space for people to innovate and ask authentic questions. If we're doing that stuff well and we're treating people as people, we're actually doing some of the best control measures we can around mental health in the workplace. But we often say, well, I thought that was health and safety, look after that topic. It's really a leadership topic. And then I always talk about the unholy triangle of executives and leaders, and then there's human resources and health and safety. And if you get those three units working, in perfect harmony, you're not actually going to have to go downstream and pull too many people out, because you're just doing the right things in a timely manner. When I talk about timely manner, one of the things I always spend time with organizations is act when you think, not when you know. So if you think there's a mental health, possibly there's a mental health issue at play, we're not doctors, but we're starting to see traits or we're seeing signs, start the conversation then. And people will invariably say to me, what if I upset them? Apologise. Say, look, I was asking a question because I cared about you, because I was concerned, and I'm really pleased to hear that everything's okay and I misread the situation. But having that conversation there is better than what typically happens now, where in 2 years' time it's taken to HR as a performance issue and people are damaged. So early intervention, doing the things that we should do well as an organisation from a leadership point of view, and a lot of the downstream mental health topics, you're kind of addressing those at source.
There's a guy who works for us, been in and around sort of my team for a while. And I could tell very early on when I first met this guy that we had a lot in common. We had a lot of common interests and things like that. But one of the things he said to me was, I really struggle with time management, and it'd be good if you could help me, as my manager, work my time management more. I'm like, my time management is crap. I've got ADHD, man. I'm an executive dysfunction champion. But what it's funny because we started talking about a lot of different things and the way that we think about things. And as I went through my diagnosis, I was suggesting to him, there's a lot of stuff that I've found through this diagnosis that I know about you, right? And so I'm not a doctor, but I would suggest that one of the things that you should do is maybe start talking to some people. Fast forward, and we get to the tail end of that, and this guy's also got the neurodivergence, and is now working towards a road to recovery, a road to better performance. Is now being supported, and that is something that I think, from my point of view, a gift now that I have that I've never had before. With the lived experience and knowing sort of what all this means now. And I don't like to be the guy that goes around diagnosing people. Yeah, because that's a trait that you can pick up all of a sudden. And as soon as someone does, oh, you must be ADHD because, you forgot your keys. But it has definitely allowed me to, and I think the word's probably compassion. Even for people, I was never really a compassionate guy, because I was always, you're at work, just shut up, get it done. Like, we pay you. What else do you want? Where I think now the compassion that has extended to me, you don't exactly know what that person's going through. And even though something that is a small, easy task for someone like you, it could trigger someone who has some historic trauma or something into a state where they can no longer work. My mind would have never gone there. Like, I would have never even paused to think about those things and to think about this person and what they may have gone through. So, whilst being neurodiverse is a curse, I think when you realize that you are, and you treat it and you support it, and then you realize that now you've been gifted with an ability to support and help others, you've got to lean into that, because if you don't, well, then you're not really using that experience to then influence the people that you're responsible for.
I think that's called wisdom, Mike.
Yeah.
I think it is.
And they said that you get that when you get older. So I think it's starting to arrive now.
I can't wait for it to go right. The area that you have came from, IT and, small startups and innovation, it's brutal.
Yeah.
It's brutal. And, you see the roots of it in Silicon Valley where, there was the burnout culture where it's a badge of honor to be burnt out by the age of 24. You might be a millionaire, but you're burnt out and
And the dichotomy with that too, the number of neurodiverse people that are drawn to STEM fields. So you've got startups, incubators, fast moving, cutthroat sort of technology startups, and most of them are full of people like me. Because we're the coders and the engineers, and that's sort of where most of that brain ends up. So even in that environment, I remember reading a stat where they were saying that they think in the STEM fields it could be as much as like 5% of the people are neurodiverse. And now they're saying it's like 20 to 25%.
Yeah,
because that's just the diagnosis rate that we're starting to see in those fields.
You asked at the top end of the podcast, what changes have I seen? The biggest change to come and the biggest change that needs to happen is around the understanding of neurodiversity in a workplace, not only from a mental health point of view, just from a societal point of view. I don't know if you've seen the newspaper today or the online news today, that they have actually, Australia have announced a strategy, a 7-year strategy for autism.
No.
And it's a good read and it's a good piece of work. Look, the US, Canada and the UK have already done this. But it looks at 4 key areas, and this is from a skim read this morning, but 2 of them were particularly interesting. One was, let's have a look how we diagnose. Let's have a look, because we had a chat before we went on air, and, in 2013, an adult couldn't be diagnosed as ADHD under the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual.
That's bizarre. You
couldn't have a dual diagnosis for ADHD and autism. So that's one of the aspects they're looking at. But the fourth area of the strategy is how we employ and retain people with, I like to refer to as neurodiverse ability. Because you just described the IT. Now, I might offend somebody in the building by saying, the stereotypical view of the IT nerd who can, get into the detail. And there's some really interesting work being done. I'm trying to think of the source of the information. It may have been Gallup. And the typical IQ of a neurodiverse person is higher than a neurotypical person. 85% of neurodiverse people will struggle to find work.
Yep.
And the challenge that I see is organisations want diversity and inclusion, or do they want the results of diversity and inclusion? It's, Deloitte's have done a fine piece of work that talks about the improved efficiencies of a diverse and inclusive team. But often we don't want the challenges that go with, having people in the organisation that maybe don't act like us, that maybe don't behave like us, that have got different coping mechanisms or different coping needs. And, the number that I see is it's generally around 1 in 7. So 15 to 20% of the population is what can be considered neurodiverse. That's a big
massive
number.
It's a massive number.
And then we try and straitjacket everybody into, I'll bring my code of conduct back out.
Yeah.
And the normal question that I then get in a workplace is, well, tell me about working from home. Should it be 2 days or 4 days?
Yeah.
I'm thinking we're really missing the point here.
100%. And that is another thing too, about the neurodiverse brain is you're not always in charge of when it's doing its best work and when it's not. Medication helps. I'll step it back to the point you raised before about the adult diagnosis. ADHD and autism couldn't be diagnosed side by side. Now they're actually diagnosed as one thing.
Mm-hmm.
So my formal diagnosis is what they call AUDHD, AUDHD, where it's level 1 autism and ADHD meshed in together. You can treat ADHD beautifully, and I'm treated for that now. I'm medicated, and it does wonders for my life in being able to do the things that you could never do. Yeah, it takes away the executive dysfunction and your ability just to get things done. But then, as we were discussing earlier, it really leaves the autistic nature of you fully exposed, because ADHD has an amazing ability to disguise some of the autistic traits, the masking nature of ADHD, where we switch personas to satisfy different people. When that starts to disappear and all you've got is who you really are, there's 2 things that you go through. The first is, so who the hell am I? Because I don't know how to just be me. I'm always me with a little bit of icing on top. And so I found that, engaging in social situations and things has been a lot harder because now I'm more autistic than I was ADHD. The interesting part of that is being a manager of people, because in some instances, you got to be there for the people that you're managing, regardless of whether or not you can be or are in a fit space to be at the moment. So I've changed my work routine and the way that I work. And in particular, the way that I work is I try and make sure that my daytime hours, and daytime hours for me are, 9 to 5 or whatever, but definitely between the hours of maybe 10 and 3. And if I'm in the office, I'm just available for people. I'm not trying to do work. I'm not doing the emails and having the meetings and things, because I'll never be able to switch from now I'm in a meeting and I'm focused on the work, and now someone's got an issue and I've got to go to the people. So I try and make sure that I've got my people time and then I've got my function time. And I try not to let those cross over, because when they cross over, it's really bad for me. But again, a workplace that is flexible enough to recognize someone that has a neurodiverse ability, and then, okay, we've got to let you craft the way that you're going to perform best, as opposed to you need to fit this mold. If you can find people that are neurodiverse, to your earlier point, build some functionality around the way that they need to work, then you'll unlock the access to that IQ, and you'll be with someone that now has a specialization or an area of focus that is going to give you a 200% output over the 50% output for the stuff that you tried to squash them into. That's how I see that equation.
There's clinical research that shows neurodiverse people can be typically 90% to 150% more effective than neurotypical people in certain applications. You said so many things that I want to comment on. Let me just put this is from the Wikipedia, so I've made this bit up. It's just my thoughts. But if you think about in a very layperson's term, that neurodiversity is the ability to think in outside the well-entrenched ways that we've been conditioned, educated to think. And you think about history. Now, we've no the term neurodiverse didn't exist till the year 2000, so we can't go back to Da Vinci and say, was he neurodiverse?
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Galileo.
Yeah.
You know,
Einstein.
Tesla.
Mm.
You know, the people who've actually made those snakes and ladder leaps forward, you know, in our history, highly likely have been neurodiverse. So let's give them a code of conduct. How do you think Da Vinci would have got by with a code of conduct?
Yeah.
Poorly.
Yeah.
Poorly. So bringing that into the workplace today, I've had people not challenge me, but certainly look for an opinion on. I said, so I remember one conversation, I'll paraphrase, was, so you're telling me, Mike, I've got to have a boutique code of conduct for every single person that comes in? And I said, no, you don't. You don't, because that's not reality. So, you know, it goes down to, you know, the law talks about what's reasonably practicable. The Discriminations Act talk about reasonable adjustment. And how do you find out what's reasonable? You start with a conversation where you're asking authentically to understand. You're not asking the kind of, I'm asking, but I'm going to, you know, shoehorn you into the code of conduct at a very near point in the future.
Yeah.
And, you know, examples around that, in terms of, you know, when we ask someone to come for an interview, why don't we send a pre-question out to say, what's your preferred communication style? Are you a numbers person? Are you a words person? On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you like or dislike small talk?
Dude, that's amazing. Because I would have had answers for all those that would have made things much easier for me.
And as long as it's used with noble intent, you know, it's not a vetting tool to say, oh, they don't like small talk. I can't talk to them about St Kilda's latest defeat on a Monday morning, so they're not in. As long as you're using that to frame it and say, well, okay, so let's think about that in the interview. And the first questions in an interview should be, what's your preferred communication style?
You know, I just want to capitalize on that for a second. The reason why I love that is because I hate small talk. I'm terrible at small talk. And when you reach executive level of the business, it's expected that you network on behalf of the business, right? So there's a manufacturer's event on tonight, and you know, you got to go and show face and do all those sorts of things. People assume because I do a podcast or because I can give a presentation in front of 5,000 people with no rehearsal, that you'd be great at that. Yeah, this is what you want to do. I'm like, nah, because I just can't do that. So again, this business is, we've now got an understanding that if there's an event on where we need to go and workshop and try and network and make new friends, Mike's not the best for that. You know, send the other folks that are more into that. But when it's time to do presenting or, you know, something in front of a crowd, we'll send Mike for that. That's fine. Where again, historically, I'm going to these events at other places that I worked at, just standing around like in a pool of anxiety, thinking, who's going to approach me next? What am I going to say? What if I say the wrong thing? What if you think I'm an idiot? Like, you know, and like that would be how I would spend all night when I was out at those things. Now I just don't do them. And it's okay because I've been able to say, this is why I don't do it. It's better for me. It's better for you. And then allowances are made.
You made a point earlier about, you know, we don't know what's going on with people. I'll guarantee one thing around identifying what's going on with people. We have no clue. We do not know. One of the person I worked for many years, probably the best orator I've seen, and screaming introvert.
Yeah.
And he used to tell me that if he was at that event, he would go and pick up a drink and get something to eat. Because if I'm eating, people might not come and speak to me.
Yeah. And if I'm drinking, I'm at least taking their edge off. So when they do, I'll know what to say. It's so amazing to me to think about how often I used to force myself into those situations and hate them, but wear it as a badge of honor because I'm doing the right thing for the business. I'm killing myself. Like I'm actually killing myself. And the other thing that I used to do all the time too, like I think I'm probably that combination of the extroverted introvert. Like I'm an extrovert up until a point, but when that switch is flicked, it's exit, like at the emergency exit. So like work Christmas parties and things. I was always the guy that social as, love it, all good. And then I get like the switch, it's time to go. I leave. Like I don't even say goodbye to people because I can't. Like that's it. I've hit that wall where I have to bounce. And talking about these things, you know, is what's super important because there are other people I know that would suffer from the same thing and that are still doing well, I've just got to slog it out. I've just got to do it because that's what I have to do in my, no, if you can lean into your neurodiversity, understand your strengths and weaknesses, that's going to be your responsibility, right? That's the other thing that I say. It's not up to your employer to work out what you're good at and what you're bad at. That's a personal thing, and you need to spend some time with that. But once you do, and you can double down on it with the support of your employer, you go 10x. And that's really been the last 6 months for me. It's been leaving behind all the things that I've always tried to do that just used too much bandwidth, would always burn me out, and would never give me the result that I need. Because again, if you're neurodiverse, you need to do something that has a dopamine result at the end. Otherwise, you won't do it. Now I get to focus on all the stuff that I'm good at, which is the strategy stuff, the outward communication stuff, and, driving the teams to get certain results. But I don't any longer have to do all of the other, executive stuff that is just not good for me. So I'm in the best working phase of my life because I'm finally at a point where I get to sort of orchestrate my career in a way that is really good for me, which naturally in turn is always going to be good for the employer, because the more I'm working in my strengths, well, the more benefit the boss gets.
Why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you do that? So, a couple of points just to touch on there. You just described in two points of that narrative what a lady called Callie Barrett, who I heard speak at a Comcare event last year, and she describes as masking.
Yeah.
And she was only diagnosed at the age of 42 as being ADHD and a measure of autism. And she said the energy it took, the absolute physical energy, she could go to the events, and this lady had been a police officer for a while.
Yep.
And she said it's just exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting. And we think, they're on form, they're thriving. Why don't we give them some more work and challenge them? It's...
they're burning out because they're switching personalities 5-6 times a day. And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that's another thing that we spoke about before we got into the chat online, was the difference between losing the masking ability and then having the autism behind it, where, I used to mask all the time. I don't do that anymore. So now I'm really scared to be in social settings because of how exposed I am. So I do less social settings because I feel more fearful of, well, now it's just me. Like I don't have all of those masks that I can put on. And it was described to me by someone as a feeling of you can fit in anywhere, but you belong nowhere. That's how it feels. That's how it feels from our perspective, is that sure, I can get along. And at high school was the perfect example for me. I could fit in with the sporty crowd, with the alternative crowd, with the nerds, I was part of all of them, but I never had a permanent home. My permanent home was just sort of isolation and me. So I always loved that phrase because that summed it up for me beautifully. You can fit in anywhere, but it doesn't feel like you belong anywhere.
I'm going to digress on another side path here. So one of your hidden talents that probably doesn't come to the fore in the workplace, you were quite a successful DJ for quite a while as well. Was that a coping mechanism?
It was definitely satisfying my need for attention. I always wanted to do something where I was on the spotlight, or under the spotlight. That's always been a driver for me, and trying to find something where I am either influential or revered, I think is probably the word, because I think from being a child and feeling, like I couldn't fit in, didn't have friends, you always dream that one day everyone's gonna like me, everything's gonna be, because I always had this desire to seek external approval,
please others.
Yeah. And I think the trap with particularly creative industries is the fame that comes along with that. So, if I'm famous and everyone likes me, I'll be fine.
No pressure.
Cool. So I spent a bit of time chasing that dream as well. But definitely, all of those things were all about trying to lean into something that I loved, but that would have made me more normal, more likable, more popular.
Can I just use that analogy a little bit? Because if I bring it back to the workplace, you've described yourself as an introvert who struggles to go to social events, but here you are in Ibiza, you're looking that way, you've got 5,000 people looking back at you, pumping the air. And somebody would say, well, that doesn't seem like an introvert to me. So we put our labels on you already.
Yeah.
And they don't line up. So I'm not comfortable with this. So I don't understand Mike. And the point I make to organisations is, I'm not saying become a commune. I'm not saying you throw away the code of conduct, but you certainly need to broaden what is deemed as, the usual behaviour in a workplace. Now, I'm not advocating naked Thursdays because it makes your code better. I think that's pushing the boat out a little bit too far.
Yeah.
But I remember having a chat with somebody and they said, I hate the dress code here because I work better when I'm wearing joggers. My answer was, wear joggers.
Yeah.
Wear joggers. I don't think the business is going to collapse because you wear joggers. So is that a reasonable accommodation?
100%. I got a story for that too, if you don't mind. I've always been like that. So autism, you have to be comfortable.
Yeah.
We even have like weird sensitivities to certain fabrics. I remember as a kid, I couldn't wear wool. Wool would drive me insane as a kid because of the feeling of wool on my skin. And I didn't even wear denim, I think, until I was probably a teenager because the feeling of denim was... So my life is T-shirts, jeans, and sneakers. Doesn't matter where I go or what I'm doing, unless someone's passed away or they're getting married, I'd probably still have the sneakers. But I've always been that way. And my first corporate job, I worked for Allen's Music, and it's a casual workplace. Like, it was a casual workplace anyway. So I'd have jeans, T-shirt, and a hoodie most of the time. I was involved in music technology in the education discipline. So my job was really to go out to schools, find out what schools wanted to do with their music programs and what technology could help them.
What a
music
cool
labs
job.
and studios and things like that. It was right up my alley. But I would do it in my usual style. And my manager at the time was, you can't go out to schools like that. Why not? Because you're representing the business. You can't go out to schools like that. Like what? Like how I would normally appear anywhere. And back at the time, I'm thinking I'm just a brat kid that wants to wear sneakers and hoodies. But the reality is that's how I do my best work. If I'm comfortable, if I go to a meeting in a suit, I'm not myself because I'm sitting there uncomfortable in a suit. I don't know how to sit. I don't know how to hold myself. It's just not me. So you can put me in a suit and I'll look nice, but nothing that I do or any of the performance that I'll give you on that day will get any value out of me. You put me in jeans, sneakers and a tee and I nail it every day of the week. And that's always been something that has been challenged with me in every workplace I've gone to. You got to dress better.
Again, from the Wikipedia, my view on that is the workplace challenge isn't the person wearing the jogging pants. It's not the person wearing the sneakers. It's the people who may feel a level of discomfort with that. It's getting them to understand that it's actually okay and it's a reasonable accommodation. So when I speak to organisations, I often say, what you've described with that person's character or behaviour, it's actually not a problem to them. And you tell me they're a high performer. And there's a few things that I encourage organisations to do around that. And one is when we're doing the induction and when we're actually doing the, welcome on board of this organisation, just say we're an organisation that actually, values diversity of thought. And this is what it might manifest as in the workplace. And so if you say this is okay. Now, again, I'm not advocating naked Thursdays, but there's certain measures we can put in place. I've seen really successful coaching and mentoring arrangements for people who have got, a diverse way of thinking, for people who have clearly shown those traits. So there's things we can do, but it's us actually the neuro. I'm describing myself as neurotypical. I'm not sure if I am. But it's that 80% of the population that considers themselves neurotypical, it's actually them that need to adjust their level of literacy around what neurodiversity is, because it's our discomfort that is really writing the codes of conduct.
Yeah, correct. And the neurodiverse brain is one that just wants to always run from structures. And when I say structures, I mean structures that aren't yours. The neurodiverse brain loves routine and organization, but only when it's based on your rules, not on others. And so the workplace as it was traditionally built was never going to be right for people like that. It was always hard to stand out.
Yeah.
But particularly now, if you can just build some avenues where a person like that can, as I was saying before, can understand what their strengths and weaknesses are. I think that's the most important thing, because we're just so confused. We don't know what we're good at. We don't know what we're bad at. We don't even know what good or bad is half the time, or what good output or bad output is. So you really need to let us explore and experiment and do a few things a few different ways. And then we start finding something that fits. And then we sort of double down into that avenue. And then you unlock, all these additional skills that you never thought this person would ever have. But it has to start with letting the neurodiverse people understand where their level of comfort is, I think. And that's hard when a business is big. If you talk about something like an organization like the size of JB Hi-Fi, right, where there's like 5,500 people, much harder to work out something like that's going to be deliverable at scale. But for small businesses, 100 headcount or less, you can have these conversations this week. You can start thinking about, what are we doing to build this space?
The scalability of solutions is something that I spend a lot of time talking about. And I do work with an organization of 15 people, and I'm doing some work with a multinational. And it's different. It's different. One of the organizations that's probably the cutting edge around encompassing, diversity of thought and character and behavior is SAP, the German organization.
Oh, yeah.
IBM do some great things.
Yeah.
So it can be done at that level, but it comes back to full circle to what we said earlier. It's also just good leadership. What about if we got everybody who, congratulations, you've been promoted, you're now going to be in charge of people. Here's some education, some literacy around what neurodiversity is. There was a piece a couple of months ago that I read, and they said in Australia, now bear with my numbers here, Mike, they said between 2018 and 2022, the number of diagnoses for a condition that's put under the neurodiverse umbrella went up by 40%. And the narrative around it was, is this people jumping on a bandwagon?
Yeah, I hear that all the time.
And what I put back to people is, think back through your own history, through school, through work. How many people did you know that were quirky, that were nerdy, that were really smart? So those people haven't jumped on a bandwagon. We just now understand there's actually a parameter, or I heard the word label, but there's something that we can actually identify their behavior around. So it's not a bandwagon, it's catch up.
Let me tell you, as a person who's lived 45 years as a neurodiverse and only known for one, it is not the sort of thing that you would choose. Like, it's not a bandwagon I want to be on. If I could wake up tomorrow and be neurotypical, obviously I wouldn't know what I would lose with my abilities, but life is significantly challenging in doing just the simple things like getting out of bed, right? So I don't think it's a bandwagon. I think it's more as the and I don't know anything about the medical side of this, but as the diagnosis criteria sort of widens a bit, obviously it's going to catch some more people, but it's the knowing. Like, I've always been ADHD. I just didn't know. And even I used to have those conversations with people where it's like, I'm sure if I had to do school again, like, I'd be ADHD. Well, it just, like, now they'd pick it up because they didn't pick it up back in the 90s, right? It was like, you're just a bad kid. Shut up, sit down, do your homework. I was the kid that, like, I wouldn't necessarily want to sit at the desk. Sometimes in the classroom, I would sit on the windowsill. Why? I don't know why. I don't know why I would do it. Teacher would get pissed off at me, and I'm like, I just want to sit here. And I also appreciate the fact that I'm breaking ranks, like it's a classroom. But now I go, yeah, cool. I just had to be different. I just had to be. It was the way that my brain was. I didn't choose it. So yeah, I think anyone that thinks it's a bandwagon thing, nah. I want off this bandwagon, please.
Collie Barrett describes it as, she said, on certain days she views her own ADHD as an absolute gift. She said she can multitask better than anybody she's come across. And other days she wanted to take her brain out and put it in the corner with a dunce's hat. She said, and I don't know why the difference is, but it's that level of parameters. So I think, I'm going to take your lived experience, Mike, as a comment there that, it's not something anybody would choose. But from the neurotypical person, I can choose how I respond to that person.
Yeah, definitely.
I can be a little bit more patient. I can try and understand why that person. I didn't realize until I started to educate myself around this topic a few years ago that I'd had an experience with a neurodiverse person long ago in my career, and it was somebody who had a propensity to stand very, very close to me when they were talking to me.
Oh, yeah.
And it made me feel really uncomfortable, to the point I said one day, look, do you mind if I just give you some feedback. I said, when we have a chat, I feel a bit awkward. You're that close to me. He said, really? And he said, where would you rather I stood? And he was very specific, a foot, arm's length, the width of a desk, arm's length, mate. And he said, right, you might have to remind me, Mike. Right, okay. Mm-hmm. And he became a bit of a joke. He would walk up to me and he would put his arm out and say, is that okay? And the guy was, the sad part of that story is a lot of people in that environment avoided interactions with the chap because he had that trait. If I wanted something from a technical perspective, I wanted somebody to dig into the industrial standards, the indices, and come out with something that was that big that I could understand quickly, he was the person. Mm-hmm. But his interpersonal traits were different. And I think that's how we've got to view people. And, did he take offense? No, he didn't. He made a joke out of it, and it probably actually improved our, interactions.
Because we want feedback. The autistic part of me needs feedback for almost everything, and sometimes like instruction and even more instruction. And I say it to one of my bosses, Dan. We've got a really good relationship because we're both sort of very technical. So we're always bouncing things off each other. But Dan has a habit of he'll say or suggest something should happen. And I'm like, are you asking me to do this or no? Well, you can do it if you want to and if you've got time. No. Does this need to happen or does it? Oh, yeah, it does need to happen. Okay, cool. When does it need to happen by?
Yeah.
Who needs to be? I'm like, dude, you can't give me something that is, here's this that we need to do. And, if you get to it, do it. I'm like, you got to tell me if you want me to do it and when by and all those sorts of things, because otherwise I'm guessing. And if I'm guessing, all I'm thinking is I'm going to do this wrong. So I think that's the other thing too with neurodiverse staff is that we do need very clear instructions. We need very clear delineation. And if you're giving us 80% and expecting us to work out the other 20%, it's probably not going to work that way. You're much better off to say, here's what needs to happen and here's where it needs to happen. How would you like to go about doing it?
Yeah, that resonates, Mike. One of my pearls of wisdom that I used to talk to people about as an HR general manager was, when you get good people, don't give them direction, give them a problem. And that works beautifully for a lot of people.
Yep.
But I had somebody once say to me, think outside what box? All right. They figuratively were looking for a box. When I said, look, think outside the box, come up with your own solution. And that wasn't their strength. If I said, look, this is what we need to achieve in this time frame, as you've just described, bang.
Yeah.
Didn't need to worry about that anymore.
Yeah.
So I've learned to certainly modify my management of people around lead with a question. What works for you? What's your preferred communication style? And, I've worked in organizations that have had, scientifically brilliant people in the nuclear industry, the people who are extremely engineeringly minded in the automotive industry, and all stops in between. And when I look back, we sort of subconsciously or gravitated to changing our approach. But wouldn't that have been a lot easier if we went in with an open, authentic question to begin the conversation? Right? Okay, that's how you learn. That's how you experience these things. That's how you believe you work, to your optimum.
Yeah. Because I can tell you firsthand, the last 6 months, I started my medication in August. Yeah, in August. So 5 months, whatever it's been, has been like a night and day difference, both in the positives, but in some of the negatives too, right? There's a readjustment phase. And I think the one thing that I try and tell people now is, like anything, when you have a mental condition, treating the condition isn't like treating reflux. You don't take a tablet and then there's no more reflux. You're just giving yourself a little bit more bandwidth to then be able to manage yourself. But the ADHD doesn't go away. And more to the point, if you're like me and you've got both, the autism actually comes out a little bit more. So even if someone's treated and even if someone's medicated, it's not going away. It's giving them a platform to be able to be more productive, but they still need the same level of support, understanding, and all that sort of thing. I hate people making the mistake of, okay, now you've got medication, great. Let's, now you're neurotypical. It doesn't work that way.
No, and it's not like putting an access ramp outside an office and that's a reasonable adjustment, and now that person will always use the ramp in a certain way. I've got a really dear friend in the UK who's in the safety game and neurodiverse and only diagnosed later in life, and similar story to yourself, Mike. And he's got, him and his boss have developed a numerical system. 10 is, I'm on top of the world, I've probably got mania and I shouldn't be at work. 1 is, you're not seeing me because I haven't got out of bed. And his boss will say, what number are we today? I'm a 7. And if he's a 7 or an 8, he's out there with the high vis and the boots. And if he's a 3 or a 4, he's at home doing technical authorship.
Yeah.
And to me, that's, you don't redefine a specific way of doing things. You're actually introducing a problem if you do that in many cases. You just think of a mechanism that allows a person a reasonable flexibility so they can do the thing that they do really, really well in an organization they want to be in. It doesn't sound that hard. It just takes a little bit more thought in the setting up of the role. And,
being able to communicate openly in something that's easy. I think that point of, having the scale that you can refer to, because an example for me in the last probably week or 10 days, I've noticed that there's something up with me. In that my ADHD was getting worse or getting really in my way. I'm forgetting things more. I'm getting frustrated at myself because I'm walking into a room and not remembering why. I can't remember where I put this thing. And so every day I'm having to check in with myself and going, yeah, look, the ADHD symptoms are peaking at the moment. So I've got to be fair on myself. And then I was discussing with you before, this weekend I wasn't. This weekend I took on a few too many tasks. I didn't get them all done, and I sort of fell into that point of overwhelm. And I yelled at my dog, and what I do sometimes, I just get that frustrated. This echoes back through my youth and the autistic part of me where I can't communicate to someone how I'm feeling. I just explode. And I yelled at my dog, and my dog is cowering in the corner and he weed on the floor. And I'm just like, nah, what have I done? And even, again, I'm medicated. I've got a psychiatrist, I've got a psychologist, and I've got an ADHD coach. But I'm still going to hit the wall. There's still going to be days where I just have to surrender to this condition and walk through it without trying to resist it and scream and, do all the things that I used to do. So that's also something that that you have to be aware of, both as a neurotypical that might be supporting neurodivergent, but as a neurodivergent, you got to look for your signs, and you've got to manage your place in the world as those signs talk to you, because you just make it hard on yourself. You can actually damage relationships if you're pretending like everything's okay and then you're really irritable and you're saying things that you don't want to say because you're just in a bad mood. So yeah, that's probably the skill that I'm working now is, when should I not be interacting and when should I be? And what are the days where it's just, today is bed and Netflix. 15 minutes is done, but it's bed and Netflix today. And then tomorrow we go and do the world. So important, because we tend to think that we need to just show up.
And, it's important not, a neurodivergent, neurotypical, it's important not to hold ourselves to an unattainable standard where we're never going to lose our shit.
Yeah.
It's how we beat ourselves up afterwards is the topic.
Yeah.
Right? And speaking as a passionate dog owner, I imagine you've only coddled the dog for a couple of days after that as well.
Treats and all. And what I and the thing again, this is something, it's amazing what dogs can teach you. How quick a dog can forgive. Within probably, definitely the next day, but the first day you could tell he was out of sorts. But by the next day, it's like nothing happened. Yeah. And then I look at that, I'm like, man, can I be more like that? If something annoys me or someone upsets me, and by the next day I'm like, don't care. I carry these things with me for sometimes years, Mike.
Yeah, and I would guess your dog knows when you're having a bad day before you do.
Golden retrievers, not the smartest dogs that have ever walked the face of the earth, but definitely some of the most emotionally intelligent. And yeah, I've mentioned to you as well that sometimes he signals to me when something's not right with me, because I am feeling a bit weird, but I'm like, nah, it's okay. And you can tell with him, he's a bit closer. He's not letting you walk into the other room without him being there. And sometimes that's my signal to actually look at myself and be like, are you all right? Because he's acting a bit strange.
Yeah, it's unconditional, isn't it? Beautiful.
It's amazing to me. Mike, as we start to get to the end, what I want to do is just flip back to the Wellfish program to see how that's going. Now, we were graced with the Wellfish program, I think it was August, September last year, October. But a great program and something that all the guys in the business spoke about and continue to speak about as far as
beautiful.
Just another level of understanding, right? We've got Wellfish stickers all over the place.
I noticed a few when I came in.
Yeah. But it's definitely, again, from my corporate life, I've been through thousands of these things. It's definitely a conversation that resonates, and it's a conversation that manages to roll on, which I think is really important. So how's all that going? And if people want to get a bite of that, what's the best way to engage?
So I'm easily found if you're Mike Hagan Consultant Services. Not the most inventive name, but it's fairly accurate. Wellfish, I'll just tell back to the origins of Wellfish. So Wellfish is, I don't like putting tabs on things. Let's call it a mental health awareness or literacy piece. I spend a lot of time talking to people about mental health. And one of the questions I'll ask people is, what do you do to look after yourself? And people would invariably tell me, Mike, well, what I used to do, I used to do a bit of mountain bike and I used to go dancing. Right? And you don't do that anymore. No, not really. Okay. And when I ask them why, they'll tell me about what I describe as the external influences. It's work. I'm at work all the time. It's the kids, it's the partner, And then I cheekily ask them to get their iPhone out, and I'll show them where to find the screen time on the iPhone.
Yeah,
and
that's a scary thing.
And we talk about, I try and delineate between, there's the things external, it's life, we've got to go and do certain things, but how much time do we burn on things that, perhaps we could be doing other things. So if I give you the gift of time, so let's just assume I can give you the gift of time back. Would you go on to do the mountain bike? And again, would you go and do the dance lessons, would you? And what they were telling me was, I'm generalizing, but 80% of people would say, I'd probably feel a bit selfish. And I look at the definition of selfish, and I looked at the definition of wellness. And I kind of welded them together and came up with Wellfish. So the premise of Wellfish is taking a bit of ownership and responsibility for your own mental health and well-being and not feeling bad about it. And, I sort of piggybacked off the James Clear theory in Atomic Habits, if you can make a 1% improvement. And, I do an exercise where I spoke to your guys about, can you see something on the wall? Or, I'll put up some activities that would make you feel 1% better. Could you eke 1% out? I talk about my gratuities every morning. Before my feet hit the floor, I'm going to think about 3 things that I'm really grateful for. This morning I was coming here to do this. I was pretty pumped about it. Coffee was one of the things that pumped into it. So it doesn't have to be cosmic. It doesn't have to be huge. And 15 seconds. Can you spare 15 seconds? Right. So there's your 1%. What about if you do something tomorrow for a further 1%? How will you feel in 100 days? And it's about that ownership of, well, I'm going to do these things. And it's all based on a lesson we've all had many, many times. Each time we get on an aeroplane. And the cabin crew stand at the front and say, in the event of oxygen masks falling from the roof, what do they tell you to do? Put your own oxygen mask on.
Yeah.
And, I think by and large people will do that. But we don't do that in life. And we don't do it in life because we feel selfish looking after ourselves. But, personally, I kind of want to be around, as long as I can be for the people that I love and care for. So why wouldn't we do that? So the whole premise of Wellfish is that, and you mentioned the stickers. So the place that I see them, so I call this the cosmic tap on the shoulder. Have you been a little Wellfish today? And I don't believe people read manuals and books anymore. So I give people a couple of references with QR codes and a couple of stickers. And those stickers came from me failing to follow the directions from a physio who was helping me with a back issue. And absolutely amazing physio, really, really switched on, diagnosed really quick. And then the second visit, she said, we'll be a lot better if you were doing the exercises, Mike. said, how do you know I'm not doing the exercises? She said, because you'll be well. So she gave me a couple of yellow stickies and told me to put them in places where she wanted me to do some exercises. So a stand-up workstation, one was in the car. And she said, each time you look at those, know that I'm stood behind you. And I use that principle with Wellfish. Now, I'm not saying Mike stood behind you, but let's say the universe is over your shoulder just saying, what about doing that thing to look after yourself today? So you guys were a trial, and there's yourselves. I'm going to do RMIT as well. And it's now up and running. It's a commercial venture. And 2 weeks after the courses, I run a survey. And the key question is, since the event, have you made any changes to look after your own well-being, and are you still doing it today? So 2 weeks after, 76% so far, people have actually made a small change and they've maintained it over 2 weeks. Now, does that mean they'll maintain it over 2 years? Who knows? But most courses, people forget about it while they're driving home.
Definitely.
So, look, I'm having a lot of fun with it. I've got a lot of interest in it. And look, you've seen me present, Mike. I'm a storyteller. I think sometimes you've got to bring a little bit of lightness and a bit of humour to what is a very, very serious topic.
Definitely around those sorts of topics, because they're difficult. And they're difficult not because they're difficult. They're difficult because they have this stigma around them, where absolutely. If I lean into this conversation, is someone going to be upset or offended, or am I going to go too far? So, yeah, I think, you have to entertain. You can't deliver information without a form of entertainment. Otherwise, it gets forgotten. What I love about the program is, the aspect of it's up to you to take time out to do that. Because again, I know as someone with mental health challenges, even when we're here talking about something like, I'm thinking in the back of my mind, sure, there's a couple of things that I know I can do every day. But then there's the part of my mind that is still, hates the world and hates the fact that I have to be engaged in it. And it, gives me a repulsion but I'm like, that's the thing that I've got to fight. I've actually got to fight that to get to doing the thing. And then sure, once the things start happening, it goes on and on and on. My psychologist always says the same thing to me. He's like, how you been feeling the last week? Been feeling pretty bad. Like it hasn't been a great week. He's like, how much screen time? First question he asks, how much screen time? So, okay, we'll halve that and go and do outside activities with half of that time. And then let's see how you're feeling next week. It happens. So yeah, I love the fact that the program actually puts a little bit of emphasis on, it's up to you, and it's okay to be a little bit selfish when it comes to yourself. You've got to look after yourself, or you can't look after other people.
No, people will tell me how little an organisation might do to look after themselves, and then I roll into the Wellfish conversation and say, well, tell me what you're doing to look after yourself. And it can be confronting for some people, for sure.
Yeah.
But again, it's not about taking a 2-week Buddhist retreat where you don't speak. It's taking 15 seconds here, a minute there. I always thought mindfulness was a bit hippy drippy type of thing. And I know now it's not. It's 2 minutes of not thinking about all those things that were stacking up in my mind when my eyes opened. I'm just going to sit outside and I'm going to zone out for 2 minutes. 2 minutes can be remarkable.
Yeah.
Remarkable.
Yeah. Mike, thanks again for dropping by. I guess we'll probably make a habit of this. You'll be back for season 3.
Absolute pleasure, Mike.
But yeah, it's been good. I think for anyone that wants to follow up, we're going to have links and commentary. I think you've got a couple of documents and things that we can load up as well. So scroll down to the comments, and anyone that wants to follow up or know any more, reach out to Mike. But dude, thanks so much. It's been a good chat.
Thank you very much, and stay Wellfish.
I'll try. Thanks, mate.